Hello, hello. All right. Well, we're going to bring this together so we make sure we can get out for dinner. I don't know about you, but I came in from Indiana last night, and I was up all night doing things. My daughter's at Purdue had me come over and give her things at midnight. I hadn't even started packing yet. And then I had to get up at 3:45 this morning. So if you're familiar with Acts chapter 20, and how Eutychus fell out of the window when Paul was talking, you might witness someone falling off the stage while he's talking. So I'm going to be as eager to get out as you are. So my name is Corey Miller, president of Ratio Christi. I'll be doing one of the plenary talks tonight. Just interest some of my books up there. On the left side, I've written 3 books on Mormonism, one of them with former BYU professor Lynn Wilder, Leaving Mormonism, Why 4 Scholars Changed Their Minds. Most recent one was with about 6 ex-Mormon missionaries. They all fulfilled their 2 years, and then it's the only book of its kind where we are systematically taking on the Mormon missionary discussions and giving people a sense of, what's going to happen on Monday night. How are they going to ask you to breathe? How many inhales, exhales? What passages are they going to cover, and so forth. So that was my contribution to my past. I grew up as a 7th-generation Mormon from Salt Lake City, Utah, but ancestor was one of Joseph Smith's bodyguards, and as one donor in Indiana told me, he wasn't doing his job very well. The other side, academic philosophy, comparative religions, things that, maybe 2 people would read those books. So one of them was based on my dissertation, comparing Maimonides, Aquinas, and Aristotle on a particular point. And then the other one is half a dozen atheists, half a dozen Christians in physics, philosophy, and rhetoric, commenting on a debate that I moderated between William Lane Craig and Alex Rosenberg about 10 years ago at Purdue University, and so it came out with a book. The newest book that I've got coming out right now will be related to tonight's talk, so I'll just press that on. A little bit about the ministry background, the reason of Christ. It's not the reason of God, but the reason of Christ. We're a Christ-centered ministry focused intently on apologetics evangelism. So what separates most apologetics ministries from Ratio Christi is that we're on the campus. What separates us from most campus ministries is that we do apologetics evangelism. It's not just apologetics, it's evangelism. We like to say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. If someone needs a hug, we give them a hug. If they need an argument, we're the ministry on campus to give them an argument. And so we try to exhibit thoughtful Christianity, rational, reflective mind, and compassionate, considerate heart, transforming lives on campus today, changing culture tomorrow. So we're like a special ops ministry focused intently on apologetics evangelism. That's what we do. We're on about 100 college campuses. We've got a high school division, a professor division, international. We have a press now. And then our bread and butter, the core university student element. So today, I want to talk to you about the Golden Rule and Worldviews. Is Jesus genuinely unique to basic morality? Now, you know how it goes in biblical studies. A lot of people get addicted to commentaries, and you say, stay away from that. Do that after you've done your homework. Don't rob yourself of the joy of self-discovery, because self-discovery in biblical studies is so much fun. Then go cross-check it with a commentary and see how well you did. It's not always that you come up with something original. This is an area where I've come up with something original. I'm so excited about it. I've developed it over time. There's a lot more to it than what you're just going to see here. But it happened by accident. A number of years ago, while I was doing doctoral studies at Purdue University in philosophy, that didn't go too well. I had to try that a second time from the University of Aberdeen, but I taught comparative religions and philosophy at Indiana University for about a dozen years. And a department head came in who was an atheist and didn't want me to teach any of the religion classes. I was teaching Eastern religions, Western religions, comparative religions, and thought religion was bogus and just took them all away and left me with, intro to ethics, intro to philosophy, things like that. And I just decided, I like to teach both. So I'm still going to find a way to smuggle it in, found some textbooks on the Golden Rule, at a time and through time, across the board from comparative religions and in science and so forth. And I was going to use those as the textbooks in my ethics class and give a little slant to what I was doing in ethics and make it a comparative ethical analysis. And when I did that, I came upon a nugget of gold, a real gold mine, a self-discovery. No one I know of has ever written about this. I'm now published on it, pop level. But it is, to me, it's pretty exciting. And so I'm asking the question, is Jesus genuinely unique to basic morality? Now, when we think about morality, sometimes we confuse that with mores, right? About 10 days ago, I was speaking at 2 different conferences in Hawaii, taking my wife there for our 30th anniversary and my family. Spoke at the North Shore on Mormonism because the BYU campus is up there. And then went down into the middle and did some other kind of apologetic talks and so forth. But when I was up north, I showed up for the first talk, and I'm dressed up. And I'm on the North Shore, surf capital of the world. In come these surfers, put their surfboards on the side, said, "Hey, dude," right? They had no shirt on, no shoes, and they just sat down. I'm like, wow. And I'm giving these talks outside. So I'm like, wow, I'm totally dressed up here. Same thing, I gave the Sunday sermon at that church, and it was the same thing. A week later, I'm interior to the island, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna put my Hawaiian shirt on, my shorts, and I go in there, and those guys are now dressed up. And I'm thinking, what in the world? This is only 20 minutes away. But so many different cultures, right? A more is like, don't put your elbows on the table for dinner time. Your mom will get furious with you. More might also be, well, did I dress the right part today? Did I dress up too much, too little? What if I had worn a swimsuit up here? Now, is that immoral, or is that just, that's kind of culturally awkward, right? Now, what if I wore a bikini? It is the 2020s after all, right? So now you're starting to bridge between mores and moral principles. And what this talk is about is moral principles. It's not mores. You know, when Darius looked to the east, he saw the Persians who used to eat their dead. He looked to the west, saw the Greeks, and they used to burn their dead. Well, which one is immoral? Are both of them immoral? Are those just based on actually the bedrock moral principles of honoring your parents, and it's the applications that were different? The fact was they believed it was righteous to honor your parents, and that's how they were going about honoring their parents, the hub to the applied spokes, right? So you have ethicists who talk about the diversity thesis, different strokes for different folks, to each their own. Everybody's got different ways of doing things, and so that proves that there is no moral law. But in fact, once you start to get below the spokes and get to the hub, once you start to realize there are fundamental moral principles here, then there is clearly a moral law. And the way that I would disabuse my freshman students at the very beginning of an ethics class from their moral relativism, which they all become in the first semester, is by doing what Aristotle talked about. He talked about general accepted opinions, GAOs. Instead of using the Hitler card that we sometimes do to try to talk about moral absolutes and create disgust or the yuck factor or the BS detector in people, that card is so used and abused, it's passé, it's boring, people fall asleep now. You gotta come up with something that's got a generally accepted opinion, and that is, hey, homosexuality. So I asked my students, how many think that it's okay to take a big bat and hit a homosexual over the head just for fun? Anybody? Anybody? Bueller? Right? No one's gonna say yes even if they thought that was the case. Because they know that it's wrong. Is it relatively wrong, like a personal preference, like flavors of ice cream? You like chocolate, I like vanilla, she likes strawberry. Or is it morally wrong? It's morally wrong. How about sex slavery? Sex slavery with African Americans. Whoa, that even makes it worse, right, in our day and age. So you throw out some examples that have current cash value that they cannot deny. Everybody knows it's wrong. Somebody, anybody, Bueller? Nobody, right? Because there are certain things you can't not know, and we know this, the moral law, Romans 1, Romans 2. But see, we have an explanation for why all people will know the basic moral facts. But not all worldviews have access to that. And so, the Golden Rule, you've heard it, you're familiar with it. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And that is supposed to be fresh, original, different. No, it's got a lot of people thinking about it. I'm going to start us off just by thinking about the text. Where does it come from? The term the Golden Rule was coined by a Christian in, I think, the 16th or 17th century. But the concept, you're getting it right here from Matthew 7, right at the end, near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, but midway through chapter 7. He says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it'll be opened. Or what person is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf of bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him snakes, will he? So if you, despite being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? In everything, therefore, what's the therefore in light of everything that was just said? Treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. This is the law and the prophets. That's what Jesus said. Now hold on to that. We're going to come back to that at the end. Little story. When I was a young whippersnapper in Utah and very mischievous during the summers, we had sleepovers. My house was kind of the place where everyone would stay. Next morning we get up and we decided we wanted to call a friend over. Called him up and said, hey, Russell, get over here. We're having lunch. We'll make you lunch. And he says, okay, I'll be right up. So he rides his bike up there, gets up there. We give him his peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And he says, well, where's your lunch? And we said, oh, we couldn't wait. We had to eat. We already ate, but there's yours. And he looks at it and he said, what's in it? And I said, what do you mean? It's peanut butter and jelly. Eat up. And he looked at us again with suspicion, opened it up, and there's this big, ugly, green grasshopper with that gook coming out of its mouth, and of course its body is smashed. And so we all started laughing, right? So he didn't fall for it. He knew us well enough. Now, suppose instead, my youngest daughter, Daisy, she said, Dad, I'm hungry. Can you give me lunch? And I said, sure, Daisy. Go ahead and just watch your favorite episode of your show, whatever you're watching. I'll make your lunch and bring it over to you, okay? Okay. So she's doing that. I make some peanut butter and jelly. I go outside, out back. I grab a handful of stones, little pebbles. And I put these pebbles in the peanut butter and jelly. And then I take that peanut butter and jelly and I give it to her and I say, here, Daisy, your favorite lunch, eat up. She takes a bite out of that and immediately she screams in angst and one of her teeth falls out. And I laugh. Can you even fathom that? You can't even imagine that, can you? Why? Because of empathy. There's no command that says don't feed your kids little pebbles. Don't laugh at them when you create pain. But there are certain things you can't not know. Now, especially in the context here that's talking about a father, but you don't need that context in the Bible. You already know that. When Cain killed Abel, he couldn't say, well, there was no command yet, thou shalt not murder. That was a long time after, so I'm not accountable. No, there are certain things you can't not know. And the way you know these things is by empathos, passion, by feeling it, right? You would think I would be the most horrible person if I ever did that to my daughter, because this is about a father and his child. That's the context here. Let's move on. We'll come back to this. My claim is that it's universally known through empathy, the Golden Rule, but it is uniquely shown through Jesus. Jesus is unique to basic morality. There's a lot of similar morality. Don't murder, thou shalt not murder, things like that. But there are some fundamental, nuanced differences, and this is going to be a difference that makes a difference. It is inclusive in its application, but exclusive in its explanation. See, in everything we do in science, there is evidence, there is data, and then there is explanation, interpretation. And we might all have access to the same evidence and data, but we have different explanations and interpretations. And not all explanations and interpretations or models are equal. And not everyone has access to the same bandwidth of explanation, right? Because you have to operate within the parameters of your worldview. And there are only three worldviews. All is mind, all is matter, or there's mind and matter, right? So there's pantheism, theism, and atheism, atheism. So suppose you're an atheist and you've got this little sandbox and you've got all your toys in it. Those are your resources. That's it. The parameters of that box. You have to explain everything from within the parameters of that box. You can't reach over to your neighbor's sandbox and still a little theistic explanation here or there, or a pantheistic explanation, because those things aren't supposed to represent reality. They're just in a textbook somewhere. This is what's real. This is all I got to explain things. So it's inclusive in its application to everybody, but it's exclusive as to its explanation. I'm going to pass on some of this stuff just for time's sake. This one I'll mention. When I'm in a college classroom, I usually don't come out of the closet, so to speak, until mid-semester, and that's when I self-identify as a believer so that I can build up credibility. But at some juncture, even before that time, I say that I think this is an objective statement. Jesus is the rational prima facie preference of where to begin your search on a spiritual journey. Why? Not biased because I am a Christian, or you are a Christian, or I am not a Christian, or you are not a Christian, but because, number one, it's the largest world movement ever. Bigger than secular movements like Marxism, bigger than any other religious movement. If you're trying to figure out truth on religious matters, and you've only got maybe 70 years, you can't go interview 8 billion people. You don't have the time. And so you got to start with areas that have had some shelf life, that have been tested over time for a long time, right? So Christianity is the largest world religion or philosophical movement in human history. No other religious leader claimed to be God the way Jesus did. Not Joseph Smith, not Muhammad, not Buddha, no one. So he made the most audacious claims, the most incredible claims, and yet his life seemed to be the most credible person. What do you think about Jesus? Well, he was a good teacher. That's what they say. He was a credible person, good teacher. No other religious leader claimed or lived a life like Jesus did. They didn't claim what Jesus did. Eastern religions are sufficiently obtuse to entertain Christ. For example, you've seen the movie Avatar, it's an incarnation, right? On campus at Purdue, the Chinese tend to be more open to the gospel. The Indians are not. They're bored of religion. They've got 330 million gods. What's one more? But they're all open to Jesus being an incarnation, an avatar, just as you are and I am and my elephant is and holy cow is, right? So it's not a big deal. They're open to Jesus being divine. The Buddhists, the same thing. Theravada Buddhism, first 500 years, it was non-theistic. After that, the majority report is you've got these bodhisattvas, these Buddhas come back to teach, like Plato's cave. And so Jesus is viewed by many as a bodhisattva. So if I get it wrong in this life, I can just cycle through and try it again in the next life, and the next life, and the next life. So for the Eastern religions, I've got all eternity just about to get it right. I better start with those that have a limited time to get it right, those of the West. And so Islam looks back at Jesus as a prophet, as a Messiah, as a teacher. Well, what did he teach? What did he predict? What were his claims? Judaism looks forward to a Messiah, and most Jews today are atheist or agnostic because they just don't have a hope for a future Messiah. So you begin with Jesus. So this is a Christ-centered kind of argument that dovetails along with a standard moral argument, providing more data for moral facts that then you ask the question, how do you have a moral law without a moral lawmaker, right? So let me begin with science. Contemporary neurology, Donald Pfaff, in the Neuroscience of Fair Play, Why We Usually Follow the Golden Rule. He says, for several years now, I have been reading far and wide the literature of religions throughout the world, looking to answer just one question. Can I find an ethical command that seems to be true of all religions across continents and across centuries? Well, I found one, and you'll recognize it instantly. You probably know it as the Golden Rule. Once I found abundant evidence for the universal ethical principle, I was convinced there must be a biological reason for it. Now, what do you notice about that last statement? Why didn't it follow? How did he introduce the biological reasoning? That tells you something immediately. He's operating from his sandbox, isn't he? Nature is all that is, was, or ever will be. So I have to explain everything, my thoughts, my beliefs, my desires, not just my toe and my hair and my eyeballs or whatever. Everything has to be reducible to some explanation from biology, chemistry, or physics at the end of the day. So he's already giving up his PH behind his D, Doctor of Philosophy. His philosophy of science, or his philosophy of knowledge at all, is that naturalism is true, and its cousin in epistemology is scientism. You have to have some empirical way to know this. Well, that's a philosophical assumption. That's not a scientific one, and we want evidence that demands a verdict, or as Socrates said, evidence would lead to this conclusion. We want to be open-minded, but not so much that our brains fall out. Let's pause. We'll come back to the science, but let's look at the Eastern religions. Let's look at Confucianism. Here I put S. Have you ever heard of the silver rule? Anybody? There is a silver rule, and yes, it's like you are thinking, compared to a golden rule, seems to be somewhat inferior. The silver rule is don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. It's the negative formulation. And so you do have, other world leaders teach that. Jesus isn't unique. Well, kind of. For Confucius, we don't have examples of him giving a G, a golden rule. We have an example of him giving from the Analects, the silver rule. Do not impose upon others the things that you yourself do not desire. A couple notes about that. By what authority does he say that, or should we abide by it, or care one whit about it? Did we just break a fortune cookie and out comes a wise statement from Confucius say? He's a wise guy. His ethics looks a lot like virtue ethics in the Aristotelian or Greek tradition, but still that's like Proverbs, generally wise statements. But there's no authority behind it. It's not like I'm going to be judged. There's no divine being that's going to punish me, dish out praise and blame after. And then further problem is, what about love? When you're thinking about an ethical system, everyone's thinking there ought to be something positive. Certainly love ought to factor into one's ethic. But how is it loving to say to someone who needs help, well, you're not hitting me, so I won't hit you. Bye-bye. We go to Buddhism. Again, another S, a silver rule. On traversing all directions with the mind, one finds no one dearer than oneself. Likewise, everyone holds himself most dear. Hence, one who loves himself should not harm another. Seems pretty selfish in a certain respect. for one thing. And if you listen to some of the parables, like the parable of the burning house, where he lies to the kids to get them to come out, whereas Jesus would probably go in after them. So the first one was the end justifies the means. And how did Buddha, he escaped as a Hindu prince and went off on his own, left his wife and his son behind, called his son's name Bond or Fetter, ball and chain. Okay. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you in the Udana. It's the no harm principle we often hear about in the East. Do whatever you want, but do no harm to others. That's an Eastern ethical principle, a fundamental principle. And you've got the no self doctrine, which is hugely problematic. See, the reincarnation concept you imagine in Eastern thought is Hinduism. It's the transmigration of the soul from one body to another, to another, to another. If you're lucky, you won't come back as a gnat. That's why people wear masks, so you don't swallow Uncle Tony on his way up. But maybe you'll come back as a cow and get extra, portions. Second breakfast. You're a holy cow. You're viewed as sacred. That's Hinduism. Buddhism doesn't have that kind of reincarnation. Buddhism and Hinduism contradict each other, even though Hinduism is to Buddhism what Judaism is to Christianity in giving birth to it, so to speak. Buddha was a Hindu prince, but this is a contradiction between the two. Just like in contemporary Judaism and Christianity, Jesus either is or is not the Messiah, but not both and. There is no soul that migrates. There is no transmigration of the soul in Buddhism. This whole no self doctrine, which is fundamental to Buddhism, is totally contradictory to this very notion of a golden or a silver rule, talking about the self. The self is part of the grand illusion, right? It's like the raindrops falling into the ocean becoming assimilated into the Borg, into the one. That's part of the problem, is that we make distinctions. Distinct chairs and tables and lights, and distinct people too. That's all part of Maya. That's part of the illusion. So it's incoherent. And again, am I going to be judged by it? There's that authority issue. Hinduism, again, silver rule. One should not behave toward others in a way which is disagreeable to oneself. This is the essence of morality. All others are due to selfish desire in the Mahabharata. Now you have the principle of ahisma, of nonviolence, right? Gandhi, yay, nonviolence, peace, love. He actually didn't live the best life, but still the teaching is there, the principle of ahisma, nonviolence. But how does that work out within the caste system? If you read the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, one of the chief characters, he is part of the warrior caste. And if a warrior has a particular telos that he's supposed to have a duty kind of to fulfill, it's to be warrior-like, which is what? Bringing Band-Aids around and things like that. No, it's getting in wars and things like that. This is one of the problems in Eastern thinking, specifically with Buddhism and Hinduism, is that it is incoherent. And so we've got these problems, but even so, even if they were coherent, at best, these are examples of the silver rule. Don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. Clearly, that is, on the face of it, different. Well, let's look at the West. We have Jesus, do to others as you would have others do to you. This is a prescription. It's not a description. It's an imperative. It's a command that makes the most sense if others have a claim on me. If they don't have a claim on me, how does it make sense to have a command that I ought to do something to other people that is good? Where does this oughtness come from? Is it arbitrary? Is it random? It makes sense because other people are made in God's image and they are deserving through human dignity by virtue of being made in God's image, such that I owe them something. I owe something to you and you owe it to me. I don't owe anything to this light bulb or this table or the microphone. Moral properties are always properties of persons. I owe something to another person who's been made in God's image. Makes a lot of sense. Judaism, again, silver rule. This is Hillel speaking. If you go on a college campus, You have the Hillel Foundation. It's like Campus Crusade. The Hillel Foundation. Well, you had the school of Hillel, you had the school of Shammai in the rabbinical literature for 500 years. Hillel's like the top dog teacher. He says, what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now, the interesting thing is he died in AD 15. Some other young man is alive at that time. Some other man goes into the temples and shows off how much he knows. Some other man sort of just gave a contradiction to Hillel here. Most people have never really thought about this. That's the whole of the Torah. Don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. Jesus says, do to others as you would have others do to you. That is the law and the prophets. You got this young 12, 13-year-old kid giving Hillel a smackdown right here. Hillel was the father of Gamaliel, who was the father of Paul, who would have taken the leadership. That's who Hillel is. Something deep is going on here. But again, it's the negative rule. Even though you've got the Bible, the Jewish leading teacher of the rabbinical period is giving the negative silver rule. Now Islam. Islam, we have a golden, but I put scare quotes around it. None of you believes until he loves for his Muslim brother what he loves for himself in the hadith. Why do I put scare quotes around that? What's curious about that? Anything jump out at you? None of you believes until he loves for his Muslim brother what he loves for himself. Can be a true believer, love your Muslim brother what you love for yourself.
It's limited to other Muslims?
Oh, it's limited. It's not inclusive in its application. It's exclusive, right? Only to those inside. Now, we do have precedent in the New Testament. Paul says in Galatians, do good to all people, especially those of the household of faith and so forth. Tells Timothy, man doesn't provide for his own household, he's worse off than a heathen. So there is a certain sense that we each have a obligation to service our sphere of influence, right? Can't do it all, but I have my family at least to look after and so forth. But what he's doing here is he's limiting it, and you all know other passages in the Quran, which is higher on the level than the Hadith. The Hadith might be more epistemic, looking at the Quran through the lens of the Hadith, through the life and character of Muhammad, but the Quran is the scripture. The Hadith is not. Hadith is sometimes treated that way, but it's not scripture. And in the Quran, the infidels have something coming for them. And it's not the golden rule, right? So it's limited in its golden, but very anti-golden for the enemies. And again here, Jesus talked about enemy love. That is significant. He addresses that issue. And back to science. We have Darwin himself saying in The Descent of Man, the social instincts, the prime principle of man's moral condition, with the aid of active intellectual powers and the effects of habit, naturally lead to the golden rule. As ye would that men should do to you, do ye to them likewise. At this lies the foundation of morality. So the golden rule is looked at as one of the most pervasive moral principles in all of humanity. From east to west in religion, in science, from the beginning to the end of time. It's one of those data points that shows that there is a common moral principle, not just don't beat a homosexual up just for fun, or don't take a sex slave to make money or something like that. There are many more you could put in that set to have a moral law. How much do you have to have a moral law than to infer a moral lawmaker? But this is a difference maker that makes a difference, showing how Jesus's morality, just on the golden rule, which is one of the most fundamentally, empathetically known moral principles out there. You don't need a Bible or a holy book to know the principle. Everyone's got it, but they don't all formulate it the same way. They get close to it, it's corrupt, it's not full. The silver rule is good as far as it goes. It's like what we talk about in politics all the time, freedom! And we usually talk about that in a libertarian sense, especially, with the encroachment of socialism. The conservatives want now to be libertarians because, they weren't conservatives, and so they're kind of pulling from the other side, and they're just saying, you stay away from me, I'll stay away from you, and we're all libertarians now, right? It's that negative kind of freedom. Stay out of my way, I'll stay out of your way, let's get along. You don't hit me, I won't hit you. That's good as far as it goes, but we all know in ethics that doesn't go far enough. Michael Roos, who was one of the atheist authors I invited the next year to debate against a Yale divinity Christian philosopher, and we had an ex-porn star and an ex-sex slave come to the campus and give their stories. What better way to get the gospel out than to talk about the soil of slavery to freedom, and then give the gospel, and everyone can sit down, shut up, and like it because those women have earned the right to say that. But then I brought up Michael Roos, the atheist philosopher from Florida. Which university was he at? Huh? There you go, at your school. I was there with you. That's right, I forgot. Roos came the year after. He was a contributing author in my book on the Craig debate, and then he came the next day. Well, Roos has written 40 books on Darwinism, 20 on philosophical, 20 on scientific. He says that the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have an awareness of morality, because such an awareness is of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth, considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something. Ethics is just an illusion. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they're referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. So we sat down on the couches. Both Roos and John Hare are Brits. We had one of the campus ministries bring out tea, and it was, Patrick Henry tea, give me liberty, give me death. We were making, jokes about it, so they were laughing in their own kind of British or British Canadian way. We sat down on the couch, and we were going to have a dialogue now. That's because that's what the Brits do. It's the Americans who like to have the debates. So we sat down on the couch, and I broke out a book that got me in trouble my first semester at Purdue in my ethics class and generated prank calls at 3 o'clock in the morning from students in the class who were frankly pissed off that I brought it up. The book is called A Natural History of Rape, a biological case for sexual coercion. And in the book, two evolutionary biologists are making the case that, according to the sandbox, everything has to have a naturalistic explanation. So, rape has to have a naturalistic explanation. What's the biological explanation for rape? The strongest male in any species seeks to perpetrate as many females as possible in order to perpetuate its DNA. So, you're just dancing, right? Dancing with the DNA here, as Dawkins would say. Don't take it personal. It's perpetrate in order to perpetuate. That's how the book is summarized. Ouch. But thank nature, we don't need that anymore. But what it means is it wasn't wrong then, and it might not be wrong in the future, and maybe for some of us it's not wrong now. So I said, Michael, is rape wrong? Blah, 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 blah. Preferentially, you believe rape is wrong. Good, Michael. Is it absolutely wrong? Objectively wrong for all people at all times and all places? That's what I thought. Because your sandbox doesn't have the resources in it to be able to explain why this is wrong. You know it's wrong. But in my sandbox, I can explain why you know it's wrong. But you can't even explain why you know it's wrong, much less why I know it's wrong, but we both know it's wrong, don't we? Yep. Well, you've got problems with Darwinism. Some people are going to say, well, ethics is just an illusion, or it's a description, not a prescription, right? And they're going to talk about descriptive cooperation. This is kin selection. The killer whales, they get more done when they do it together. We can do things bigger and better together, we like to say on campus. So you build a coalition with other campus ministries. Or the wolf packs, they can get more done if they do it together, right? That's just expedient. That shows what I need to do if I want more stuff, but that doesn't tell me what I ought to do in any moral sense. These feelings aren't the same as prescriptive obligation or normative morality. We're talking about oughtness here. Is it the case that I ought not bash a homosexual over the head just for fun, or is it not? Have sex slaves just for fun, or is it not? Golden rule, or is it not? No, the way we totally understand this empathically, not giving my daughter stones in her peanut butter and jam sandwich, is in a moral sense. Devoid of the normative feature, how do we necessarily avoid conclusions from a natural history of rape, the biological basis for sexual coercion? You can't. It's very difficult to do. And that's why I was getting prank calls at 3 o'clock in the morning my first semester as a PhD student at Purdue. One of those students ended up getting kicked out of the program for burglary. Another one of them has been recently under investigation by the Texas Attorney General. A congressman in Texas contacted me for a character assessment because this guy doxed a police chief's wife, has written 4 books on anarchy, and has said some very, very nasty stuff. But if there is no God, everything's permissible. So let's take this back then to the Bible, but let's talk about the Good Samaritan story. The silver rule is like skepticism. How so? Well, the virtue of skepticism is that you never have any false beliefs. That's awesome. I mean, who would love that, to never have any false beliefs? But why does it never have any false beliefs? Why would skepticism never have any false beliefs?
Because it fails to assert that there are true ones?
Yeah, because they have no beliefs. They don't have false beliefs because they have no beliefs, including no true beliefs. They're just a paralytic sitting in the corner of a room wondering if they exist. And they can't live. But after all, you do have to look both ways and cross the road. You have to live your life. Skepticism is absurd and it's self-defeating because then you have to be skeptical about skepticism. It cannot get off the ground. The silver rule is kind of like that. So you get one guy walking by, a guy hurt on the ground, and you say, ooh, that looks painful. Oh, you need to get a doctor. Whoa, look at the time. And he happens to be a doctor or a scribe. He walks off. Second guy comes up and says, ow, oh, I feel for you. I would hate to be you. You need to get that looked at. Oh, geez, I'm late for a meeting. And he happens to be a doctor. The empathy, a third guy comes up and you're already putting your fists up ready to punch this guy if he does the wrong thing. Because why? You all know what the right thing to do is. And it's not to come up to him and say, well, you're not kicking me in the head, so I won't kick you in the head. Silver rule. No, it's the golden rule, and the only teacher that teaches it universally, inclusively, is Jesus, and by his very life, he demonstrated it. The English teacher said, show, not tell, and that's what we have in the Christian gospel. Well, an objection. The golden rule says, do to others what you want them to do to you. It seems more like Immanuel Kant, you Kant no ultimate reality, like Immanuel Kant's hypothetical imperative. That is, if I want to get to New Jersey quickest from Jacksonville, I ought to fly. That's the hypothetical imperative. That's the expedient imperative. But that's not the categorical imperative. That's not the moral imperative. Morality would have nothing to do with that. This is treating this golden rule as like a hypothetical imperative, that there's no moral ought behind it, but that is not what anyone at all means. It doesn't tell us what we ought to do, or what we ought not to do in a morally significant way, is what the charge is. It doesn't morally prescribe or proscribe. In other words, do to others what you want them others to do to you sounds like relativism. I mean, maybe I like S&M, and so I'm going to practice S&M. Or maybe if I got caught speeding and a judge was going to punish me, I would hope he wouldn't punish me. I would hope he would exonerate me. Therefore, if I was a judge, I should never punish anyone ever again. Because it's all based on what I want. Me. It's relativistic. The problem with this objection is it lacks the immediate context, the surrounding context, and the sandbox meta context. The Golden Rule is governed and makes the most sense with explanatory scope and power in accordance with the Christian worldview, and that is the context in which it was given in Matthew 7. It wasn't just given blasé, it was given in a father-child relationship, a filial context in which we all empathically know no father, not even an evil father, would not know how to give good gifts to his own children. He might go kill the Jews, but he's going to give the Germans good stuff if he's Hitler. That's a father-child relationship. And that's embedded in the Sermon on the Mount, in the most pacifistic, most enemy love kind of a chapter, turn the other cheek, right? Which is embedded in a greater meta-narrative in Judaism and with a heavenly Father, in which there are moral absolutes. And there is an absolute good grounded in God. So each worldview is going to have to explain within the parameters of its worldview. It turns out, if we wanted to unpack this, have a big dialogue on it, write an article on it, a book on it, Christianity is going to have the privilege of explanatory scope with respect to the evidence and power. It's going to explain more and better this rule that we all know. The Golden Rule has been looked at as a rule of ethics. Be nice to other people because you want them to be nice to you. It's got far more gold behind it than you realize. It is a piece of data that shows Christianity is superior ethically, existentially, metaphysically, and so forth. So the Golden Rule doesn't emerge in a vacuum like other ethical principles. It's considered within the context of a worldview, a text, and in practical wisdom. I say that belief is to truth what desire is to desirable, right? You want your kids to eat what is naturally healthy. We want to have true beliefs. We don't believe something and that's what makes it true. We want our beliefs to align with what is true. Likewise, we want our preferences, our desires, to line up with what is desirable objectively for the sake of goodness. We tell our kids, eat your greens. No, that's gross. Cotton candy's good. No, cotton candy's good to you. Broccoli is good for you. And our job as parents is to get their palate to acclimate, to come to like, to come to prefer this. This, by the way, has relation to the whole issue of sexual orientation. Orientation toward children, orientation toward animals. Orientation is simply desire, preferences, inclination. Yeah, you may not be born, you may not have chosen to just like chocolate or like the color blue, and then tomorrow change your mind. Today I'm going to like red as my favorite color. Today I'm going to like strawberry as my... No, you sometimes there's something about it, maybe something biologically in the palate that inclines you, but it doesn't determine you to eat chocolate or to buy all and only blue clothing. Just as we want our beliefs to correspond with what is real for the sake of truth, we want our desires, our preferences, our orientation to correspond with what is desirable for the sake of goodness. And that word, do to others as you would want others to do to you in the Greek is pregnant with reason and pregnant with teleology. Our resource publications for Ratio Christi, there's a booklet I've written, Is Christianity Good or Bad for the World? I kind of get into this. This whole talk is actually the mid part of the book. The Problem of Evil, where evil is actually an argument for God's existence. And then the recent moral argument. So you can find more stuff like this on our website. Most of these booklets, you'll find them out there, are written by PhDs, so they're expertly written. They're reduced down to 25 pages, so they're accessible. And they're forced to write at the 11th grade reading level. And we've got them on everything from classical apologetics on suffering and scripture and science to cultural apologetics on race, class, sex, gender, ethnicity, and so forth. So check them out. They're online. They're, you can put your email in there, get the PDFs for free, or you can get the EPUB versions or the printable versions for small groups, for your youth groups, or for doing campus apologetics evangelism. And that means you all need to join Ratio Christi and become chapter directors and have a lot of fun and take back to universities. Yay. That's all. Yeah, any questions? I think we'd have maybe just a few minutes.
You mentioned that, if I'm understanding you right, that the Golden Rule, the Christian Golden Rule, is its real definition by the context of its written in love. Love is, because Christ is teaching love your neighbor, and like a parent, love your child.
Yeah. Well, remember when I said one of the problems at first with Confucianism is where's the love in it? It's just, it's a virtue ethics system. There is no distinction, a clear distinction between a creator and a creation in the East. That is pantheism. All is mind at the end of the day. All is spirit, all is God. Matter is illusory. Over here, all is matter, and consciousness or mind is illusory. Theism has both mind and matter at the macro scale, and right here, a psychosomatic being, a body, soul entity, right? So you don't have this proscription or prescription from some transcendent divine being giving a command who, unlike, say, Allah, is also intrinsically, essentially loving himself, which is codified by an apologetic using the triunity, because love existed for all eternity between the beings before creation happened. With Islam, that doesn't even make sense. So this is why there are so many reasons like that, but it's in the West, in theism, that you have a clear distinction between creator and creation, and then you want to know something about the nature of that creator according to its own worldview, right? Because it's your sandbox you're trying to explain from. You can't borrow capital from your neighbor's sandbox because these are contradictory positions. One is true and the other two are false. And so if this one's true, you got to explain everything from here. If this one's true, you got to explain everything from here. If this one's true, everything from here. We have greater resources for explanation in accordance with our worldview. So that's an issue that, you just have to weigh also, that you can't explain a statement exactly from a different worldview, except to say it's a way to show deficiency in the worldview. So the whole notion of you ought to do good things to people and not just bad, how does that make sense among molecules? How do you even have free will amongst molecules? A majority of molecules get together and say, hey, let's go left. No, let's go right. Let's vote for it. No, molecules are determined by the laws of physics. It's determinism all the way up, all the way down. So ethics presupposes praise and blame, which presupposes some robust notion also of freedom, right? So that we believe in human responsibility, which means the ability to respond. But if all I am is molecules, fat chance that I even have that, so fat chance you can even have ethics, and that's why Michael Roos is just saying it's part of evolution. It's biological adaptation. Think nature, we haven't figured that out yet, otherwise we might start going rogue on each other. We think that we ought to do to our neighbor as we want our neighbor to do to you. Whew. Keep thinking that, people. It's going to be good for me. Yes, final question.
You use the phrase the West. What do you see as the origin of the West? Scholars at conservative colleges like Hillsdale College, Ralston College, New College, they look at the Battle of Thermopylae and self-sacrifice. They're trying to not use religion, is my point. When they're defining the origin of the West or Western civilization, what do you see as the origin of?
Yes, I would love to bring the classical synthesis together of, and that's why my dissertation was on Aquinas, Maimonides, the most famous Jewish, most famous Christian philosopher by prolificness of writing, with Aristotle, because it's called the Aristotelian or the classical synthesis. Aquinas was an Aristotelian, not a Platonist. Maimonides was an Aristotelian, not a Platonist. Avicenna in Islam, or Averroes, was an Aristotelian, not a Platonist. So there is the Aristotelian, Islamic, Jewish, or Christian synthesis. You can do the same thing. Each one of them had Plato. Anselm and Augustine were Platonists, or vice versa. But you're going back to the Greeks, like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, who had a view of an objective world with teleology bathed in it. They were not like the Greek religions, which were polytheistic, which, by the way, is still a form of theism. Polytheism is not, at the end of the day, pantheism, depending how you define it, and it certainly is not atheism. It is still a form of theism, just like deism is still a form of theism. But you had, the Greco-Roman revealed theological synthesis. They believed in moral absolutes. They believed in monotheism. At the end of the day, there's some one concept of God. I was defending my dissertation in Aberdeen in front of the guy who claims to be the first trans philosopher in the UK. He was a member of the Church of Scotland, and he was undergoing a sex change operation at the time that I was defending the dissertation. And he went after J.K. Rowling. You can Google it because she's anti-trans. He's pro-trans, but he said, he was getting mad at me at the very beginning. Why do you make such a big deal? What is the Nicomachean ethics in Aristotle all about? I said, happiness. He said, that's right. So why do you make such a big deal about God? And I says, because Aristotle uses the term theos or its cognates twice as much as it uses eudaimonia, happiness, and its cognates. Aristotle's ethics cannot get off the tarmac without God. So in the West, I don't need to go back to Moses. I can talk about Plato. There's some people, like I think Tertullian, or was it Justin Martyr, thought that if Plato had read Moses, he would have become a revealed theist or something like that. There's a real easy jump from Plato, Aristotle, Socrates to Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. So Western civilization encompasses that teleology, that purpose-driven life that someone wrote a book about. But if you want, scratch that I even said term West.
Bonus question for all the points.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell, now passed on, proposed a theory of the hero's journey. I'm not going to bore you with the details.
Is that the one we use in marketing now? The hero's journey in marketing? Okay, never mind, forget it. Okay.
I don't get the reference.
Okay.
I apologize. I never gave much credence to it
Okay.
Odysseus,
Okay. Greek tragedy and so forth. Okay, got it.
he ties it in with Eastern thought, all kinds of things. And so I tried to disprove it for many, many years. And then I decided, well, this is, and he applied it to Jesus. That Jesus, like the heroes at Thermopylae, sacrificed himself as the soldiers at Thermopylae did. And I'm wondering, could this be true on the basis of what makes the Christian hero's journey different with Jesus is that we participate in his journey, whereas you cannot participate in the fiction of Odysseus. There's no way on earth you can participate in the hero's journey of the Eastern accounts.
Okay, and so what's your question? Just because I'm not clear yet.
What do you think of the idea of interpreting Joseph Smith's hero's journey?
Joseph Smith's hero's journey. Oh, Campbell. Okay.
What did I say?
Joseph Smith.
Joseph Campbell.
Okay.
Apologize.
Okay.
Joseph Campbell. I guess what I was trying to say is I tried to disprove it, couldn't disprove it. I looked at all the original sources. It seemed to be saying what he was saying. And then he brought Christ into it, and I followed it wherever he was going. But to him, they were all cut of the same cloth.
I mean, he's putting a philosophical paradigm on a historical narrative. The debate here for interpretation from the resources available is about a time-space historical set of questions. Jesus didn't claim just to be a moral exemplar or a hero. He claimed to be God, and people picked up stones to stone him for it. So you can't just put him into this psychological, psychoanalytical paradigm and say everybody's the same thing. Well, you might project that. Someone once said that, God made man in his image and we've been trying to return the favor ever since, right? You can't just project on Jesus anything you want because we have evidence. And he was a time-space person, and he made certain claims that you have to deal with as a historical consideration, not a philosophical one.
So you would reject Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey as it applies to Jesus?
Based on what I know about it, hearing about it the first time, yeah. But I would want to give some credit to actually reading what he said, because I just can't. No, it's fine. I just can't appreciate it because I've not read it. But I think what he's doing is projecting, and that's illicit because this is a historical consideration. Okay.
We want to thank everyone for.
Thank everyone.
I want everyone to thank Corey for.
Oh. All right. Thank you.